Not long ago, my niece took her 10-year-old son to the doctor for a health checkup. On the way there, my great-nephew Kelvin pondered on the visit, and he exclaimed that he would probably get a pencil, or he'd probably get a shot, and if he got a shot, the doctor would probably give him a pencil. My niece, to reinforce him, said that was good that he was going to get a pencil for getting a shot. And Kelvin said, not really. The pencils are hard to sharpen, and they usually broke within 3 seconds. Well, said my niece, maybe you should just leave the pencil alone. Oh no, exclaimed Kelvin. I'll keep it for my collection. What collection is that? Asked my niece. My collection of disappointments, explained Kelvin. I think we all, if we stop and think about it, have collections of disappointments. I'm not talking about regrets that can hold us prisoner for a lifetime, but disappointments when outcomes do not meet our expectations. I remember disappointment after the last presidential election. My disappointment was that half the people I encounter must think differently than myself. I don't think I'm alone. In December of 2021, the fellowship program team got together and discussed what our program focus would be for 2022. If you remember, an election had just taken place a month earlier, and a transition in governance was taking place. Previously, during that election campaign, we as Americans were told time and time again that we lived in a divided country, and my program team associates and I believed it. So we discussed it, and we decided that unity would be our theme for 2022. But like all good intentions, we may have drifted off course. We had services that expose racism, health services to build our moral character, programs with historical references, and mostly ways to accomplish inner peace and joy and confidence, but nothing in the playbook to amend any divides. Last fall, after the 2022 midterm elections, we saw once again the mudslinging and biased campaign ads that fostered the belief that we lived in a house divided. Watching, reading, and experiencing this social discord made me think of playground arguments, where the arguments were settled with phrases like, "You did it first," "I got here first," "Get your own ball." So this is my attempt to share with you what we can do to narrow that gap, if not close it altogether. In preparing for this service, I've read many articles ranging from book reviews, editorials, articles on current events like shootings, education, and have surveyed friends and family. In doing so, I realized that I live in a bubble of liberal or progressive thought. My friends and family are pretty much aligned with me. I think we can all agree that life is better when the herd is going in the same direction. It was hard for me to get responses from people I know who think differently than I. But some of the responses I did receive are as follows. How can you talk to anybody that doesn't believe in science? I get along with them just fine. I never rub it in their face when they lose an election. So much of what I see going on is about revenge. They continue to dig at the dirt to try to expose sins that are greater than what their party had committed. I know lots of people with college degrees, and they aren't any smarter than me. I have street smarts. Conversations never include politics or religion. This person obviously had never talked to a UU. We need to establish commitment against turning a blind eye to the unacceptable. One person quoted John Stuart Mill, a 19th century utilitarian philosopher. For evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing. It's interesting to me that when the idea of a house divided is mentioned, the responses mostly point to politics. I seldom see this division while standing in line at the grocery store. I think most people are concerned with their families, the cost of living, and their health. The only indicator may be on a t-shirt or the logo on the cap on their head. A friend includes me in emails where he shares articles from a liberal editorial source called the Rud Pundit. It's no relation to me. What he is sharing was an article that somewhat gleefully danced around the fact that one party didn't do as well as they thought they would do in the midterm elections. This was a prime example of the childish playground attitudes I referred to earlier. But what really caught my eye was the second article about a college that was preparing to play their rivals in a collegiate event. The rivals' mascot is the Native American, or the Indians. Prior to the event, there was much rallying about which included hanging effigies of Indians from trees. What struck me was that the participants weren't one political party or the other. They were one collective. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, there were probably some who disapproved of this, but there was definitely a third party. And the party that did disapprove were the Native Americans. And that got me to thinking that we too should be that third party, the party that acts on issues that are not in tune with our principles. After all, we are an outlier too, as Unitarian and Universalists. In fact, I would dare say our fellowship is a minority within a minority due to being lay-led. We are our own policemen. We are the ones that should take the lead and speak up when we see an injustice. But we should not try to intimidate people by taking a moral high ground and use that position to say that we are better than the rest. We need to take action using specifics as examples in addressing civility, respect, and normal discourse. But we as Americans are not all UUs. So who are we as Americans? Matthew McConaughey in Esquire says, most Americans don't stand on the political fringes. We are reasonable and responsible, and we share stored more values than we are being told. And we believe that meeting in the middle is a service of the greater good. We have the majority, we have the numbers. And that's why it's high time we take the megaphones back from the extremists who have been manufacturing these fake fractures. They've been selling these ideas at the pep rally far too long. If we want safer communities, more freedom, and better leaders, we're going to have to build better people. When I first read this about taking back megaphones from the extremists at pep rallies, I was drawn to the voices of Proud Boys, Alex Jones, Black Lives Matter, Antifa advocates. But in reality, it's Tucker Carlson leading the pack with more viewers and Rachel Maddow coming in at a close second. It's the network broadcasters leading the way, one scaring the public with socialism and the other with threats of autocracy. So how do we become better people when we are bombarded on social media with information and disinformation designed to influence our judgment? The biggest problem, as I see it, is there's too many variables of trying to figure out what is true and what is false. It all comes down to, like in our Time for All, who tells the best story? If life's problems were broken down into equations to get the answers, there would be few constants, but the variables would seem infinite. Urban versus rural, degree versus not degree, rich versus poor, one religion versus another, male versus female, red versus blue, and one race against another. And it goes on and on. And then there's a timeline where prevalent behavior will switch from one point of view to another. It's often hard to know where we stand when the path of political parties crisscross each other in the course of history. The right becomes the left, and the left becoming the right. We have to pay attention. Columnist Ross Duha says one of the ways of understanding where we are in today's divide is to see all the ways in which conservatives and progressives have traded attitudes and impulses. Duha suggests the populist right's attitude towards institution has the flavor of the 70s left, skeptical, pessimistic, and being paranoid. While mainstream MSNBC watching left has a strange new respect for the FBI and the CIA. The online right likes transgression for its own sake, while the left dabbles in censorship and worries that the First Amendment goes too far. The point of this reversal isn't that either side is positioning itself to flip, but evolving positions in American society, with cultural liberalism much more dominant in the elite institutions than it was a generation ago, and conservatism increasingly representing downscaled constituents and outsider ideas. But one might say that the morality of each party may come down to what needs to be done to get the votes. Columnist David Brooks explains that the variables as motivation while reviewing a book by Will Storr, who advocates that the story version of life is an illusion. He argues that people are driven by status. Status is not being liked, it's about being better than others. Storr says when people defer to us, offer respect, offer us praise, or allow us to influence them in some ways, that is status. High status people get to talk more and have a sense of purpose. Storr goes on to say that we tell ourselves stories, that we are the heroes on journeys toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. These are only lies the mind invents to help us feel good about ourselves. Now, if I was a smarter person, I'd end right there. But Janice insists that I talk for 20 minutes at the minimum, so I'll keep going here. The inventions become games. For example, the high school game of competing to be popular, the lawyer game to become a partner, the finance game to make the most money, the academic game for prestige, the sports game to be the best. Even when we're trying to be good, we're playing the virtue game to show we are morally superior to others. But Brooks reminds us that not all of these suggestions do not take into consideration the loftier desire of the human heart. But it can be argued that this game mentality pervades our culture right now. Social media is the status game par excellence, where status is measured with views, likes, viral rankings, and where partisan armies fight for recognition. One of the features of this gaming mentality is that it turns life into a performance. People fulfill their status by creating a different persona that will win it for them. An example can be seen with some of the people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They were dressed like they were from some blockbuster movie or video game. Others troll the internet and call it research while looking for clues that would support and link their ideas with conspiracies making another reality altogether. So how do we make that better? One way is to keep an eye or keep up with ever-changing vocabulary in order to speak the same language. Who knew years ago that mouse, web, internet would mean something totally different than it does today? Now we are encouraged to be woke and know what all the acronyms stand for, like BLM, LBGQT, the alphabet people. We need to know that something simple like go Brandon go means something totally different to the crowd. know what a republic is, the difference between democratic, socialist, communist, autocratic, and dictatorial societies. A few words that I've come across are municipalism, often confused with socialism. Presentism, where people of the past are judged by today's standards, and maybe something as simple as bio break, replacing going to the restroom. Throw in some multicultural elements, and you'll have a delectable diet of bilingual gumbo. The other day, I heard being cool has been replaced by refreshing my chill. Once we have a vocabulary appropriate for the time we live in, let's look at the information we are receiving. In an article by Ebony Rice, she shares these tips to separate facts from falsehoods. Watch for red flags that often accompany misinformation. Phrases like, make this go viral, the media won't cover this. This is the information they don't want you to see. These term suggestions and the use of the word they are designed to play with our emotions and convince us to share claims not necessarily based on hard evidence, and often veer into conspiratorial thinking. One tactic is to push conspiratorial thinking is to take unrelated facts and string them together to prove a point. This is called using motivated reasoning or confirmation bias. There you go, more linguistics. Another thing is to pause and verify before you share. Watch out for messages that evoke strong emotions. Political messages are often designed to do this. Therefore, it's best to pause for a moment. Remember, it's hard to walk back on things that turn out not to be true. An MIT study shows that misinformation spreads 6 times faster than truthful information. Alexander Vindman, the White House whistleblower, says, there's something primarily eye-catching about disinformation. There is this preconceived notion that there are heuristic things we latch onto, and they are more enticing and powerful than facts. It takes a huge amount of energy to overcome that disinformation. We need to develop systems, whether as individuals or a country. We have to deal with this bad information. We have to deal with ways this bad information will go viral. The best thing we can hope for is a process where people develop a resistance to misinformation. I found that to be challenging as we all have been programmed to catch these promotions as things that makes our lives better. The fast car, the right shoes, the best cereal. Even the jokes and memes we like have elements of truth, no matter what side they come from. Social issues are tough to address. I know I often come up short, rationalizing against somebody who is just looking out for their family. Another action item would be to look for credible sources. Check to see if the news source is transparent about their reporting practices and ownership, whether they have ethical standards. Check to see if the news organization has a policy on corrections. No one is perfect. And most organizations build a reputation on accountability and appeal to our feelings. Feelings about issues should be respected. But when those feelings are based on misinformation, our ability to participate in the conversation is taken away. Things said may feel true, and we may want to believe them because they conform with our pre-existing biases. Being news literate makes us susceptible to being misinformed. That makes us less susceptible to being misinformed. Knowing where to find accurate and trustworthy sources of information benefits us all. Marie Sharif suggests learning to be an active listener can help and unite. She says listening in many ways is the most important part of communication. The bottom line is the genuine listening requires our full presence and participation. It is an active process. But then again, active listening is not only how we learn, it's also the basis of relationship building, and high-quality connections are the cornerstone of a meaningful life. This is worthy of attention. Here are some of the ways to improve listening skills. Try to get people's names right. Names are important. They are the parameters for rules of engagement. Names get people's attention. Allowing there to be moments of silence, using those pauses to take a breath and collect our thoughts instead of calculating a comeback. Ask people to say more. There's often times when people find it hard to communicate their point of view, especially when there's a misunderstanding. In conclusion, and as a recap, I pointed out that we must consider the backgrounds of those we are speaking to, realizing that we do not have the same origin, advantage, or cultural upbringing. We all do not share the same sources for information. And where are we getting that information? Develop several sources that can be relied on, cross-reference to get more views. We should examine our intentions and check our egos at the door. Are we trying for one-upsmanship? We should all know that gaming as a way of life is immature. Maturity means rising above the shallow desire for status, and that really doesn't nourish us. It's about cultivating the higher desires, the love of truth, and learning, and not settling for easy answers. We should be open to be engaged in society and understand the vocabulary that is being used. Ask the questions. What does that acronym stand for? Is the word you're using or hearing being used in the right context? Is your mouse not working, or is there a dead mouse on the floor? Are we listening to what was being said? Are we giving our full attention? We don't always have to win when engaged in a conversation, and especially a disagreement. We may want to take a step back or come to what I consider a stalemate by agreeing to disagree. Taking a step back gives us time to check our sources for what we're being told, and maybe give us time to learn and to be open to the possibility of being wrong. We need to look for common ground. Recently, I stood with a man at a rally, and we both supported the cause we were rallying around. The next day, I saw in the paper that he was interviewed, and he stated that what his political base was. It was totally opposite of mine, but we stood on the issue together. As I get older, I find that leaning on the slogan, "Side with love," helps me to determine which side of an issue I stand on. This brings to mind emotions, compassion, empathy, the automatic appraisals influenced by my evolutionary and personal past. I was fortunate to grow up in a loving family, afforded a good education, and a realization that I was more privileged than some, and like Tom Bodette, the Motel 6 guy, less privileged than others. This fellowship has helped me be that person, and as a UU, I also have 8 principles that I can use as guideposts. And sometimes in a pinch, as we all know, when we hear something that doesn't ring true, all it might take is a shake of the head. Thank you for listening.